Hello everyone, welcome to my second channel that I barely care about, where I upload stuff that are not related to technology. And yeah, I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm also a pretty big political enthusiast, so the 2022 midterm election, which elects a third of the Senate, the entirety of the US House, and also a lot of governorships, is just right around the corner. It's in fact only 2 days away as of the recording of this video on November 6th. And here are my final predictions for the US Senate, House, and governorships. So yeah, we still have 2 days to go, and I could make the final prediction video tomorrow, but even if like a new story comes out tomorrow about how Herschel Walker beat his 26th wife to death and then proceeded to have sexual intercourse with her body, I doubt that will impact the actual election results that much, because a lot of people have already voted already. A lot of people have already voted in early voting stations. So yeah, this is just my final prediction for the 2022 midterms, 2 days before the election. And let's see how accurate I will be. I will make a follow-up once the results are clear and the election's over. I'll make a follow-up, then we can see how close I am and how good I did, especially compared to the election pundits and the big predictors. But let's first go over the terminology I'm going to use. So tilt is the margin of victory is less than 1%. Lean is the margin of victory is between 1 and 5%. Likely is 5 to 10%. And I characterize an election as safe if the expected margin of victory is over 10%. And the star next to some candidates' names indicate that they're the incumbent or the current office holder. So yeah, you may stop the video right now and exit and happily watch something else if all you need is a Senate map and how much seats each party is gonna hold. But stay with me for several more minutes if you want an explanation for why I characterized the races as what they are. So, a disclaimer, politically, I identify as center-left, so I'm more affiliated with the Democratic Party and support their viewpoints more than the Republicans. But I will try my best to not let my feelings interfere with the facts, so I'll just try to make this prediction as unbiased as possible. And right now, the Democrats hold 50 seats in the Senate, and the Republicans hold 50 seats too, with VP Kamala Harris tie-breaking vote giving Democrats control of the chamber. So this is the narrowest the Senate majority can ever be. And this year is a really bad year for the Democrats, because if you look at the approval rating for Joe Biden right now, you can see it's not very good. And if we look at the generic ballot, if we look at the generic ballot right now, which is this one, I believe, you can see Republicans does have a lead right now of around 1 point, which doesn't seem like that good for the Republicans, but keep in mind that the Democrats barely won the Senate and barely held on to the House in 2020, despite leading in a generic ballot by 7 points, I believe. So yeah, Republicans will pick up 2 seats and therefore take control of the chamber. And I'm just gonna give an explanation for some of the races highlighted here, which I think are competitive. I'm just gonna not talk about the safe Democrat-Republican seats, because it's pretty obvious why that California will re-elect its Democrat senator. So we're just gonna go over some of the competitive ones and some of the noteworthy ones that may not be so competitive. So let's start on the West Coast with Nevada. So in the Nevada Senate race, it pits incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto versus Adam Laxalt, and I think he'll be a lean Republican margin. So more than 1% margin of victory, but less than 5%, and it's gonna be a gain from the Democrat. So Nevada is a swing state. It has voted Democrat at all four of the previous presidential elections, but not by a big margin. Biden won there by around 2%, and so did Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And if we look at the polls right here, we can see that the polls does fairly significantly favor Laxalt over Cortez Masto. And Cortez Masto isn't like a very name known incumbent, and it's not very popular either. There's definitely dissatisfaction with National Democrats. This is a theme in this year's election cycle. So, yeah, basically, Joe Biden's Joe Biden most a majority of Americans don't think Joe Biden's doing a good job, and they don't think Democrats are doing that good of a job either. Because gas prices are just a little bit high. Inflation is around 8%, which is average globally, but it's the highest the U.S. has ever seen in decades, I believe. And yeah, it's just not a good look for the Democrats. And the top two issues are definitely inflation and gas prices. So there's definitely dissatisfaction with National Democrats, and that's going to be a theme in all of these competitive races right here. And unlike some of the other questionable choices by the GOP, Adam Laxalt is actually a pretty good GOP nominee. He had political experience as the Attorney General of Nevada from 2015 to 2019. So, yeah, given that Nevada is a swing state, Biden barely won there, and the Democrats right now are not very popular. So it's pretty natural to assume that the race is going to go to the Republican nominee, which has prior experience, Adam Laxalt. Now let's move on to Arizona. It's Nevada's neighbor to the southeast. So right now the incumbent is Mark Kelly versus Blake Masters. And Arizona is also a swing state. Up until very recently, it's a Republican stronghold, but Biden did manage to win there barely by like a fifth of a percent. However, Mark Kelly actually won his election by more than 1%, and the polls does favor Mark Kelly if we look at the polls right here. You can see some of the polls show that they're tied, some of them show Kelly leading, but none of them show Blake Masters leading, which is quite interesting. So yeah, Mark Kelly has a 1 point advantage in the polls right now, and he is a fairly popular and also well-known incumbent. He, the former NASA astronaut, and he is also like a outspoken gun control advocate, but that's not a issue, like a top issue in 2022 right now. So he's fairly popular and he's well known. And most importantly, there's a bad Republican nominee with zero political experience. This race would easily be like at least a lean Republican, or maybe a likely Republican if, like, let's say Governor Doug Ducey of Arizona decided to run against him instead, then yeah, he would definitely lose if there was a stronger Republican. But the thing is, Blake Masters, he has zero political experience, and he is funded by like a singular billionaire, I believe, which definitely isn't a good look for you. And he isn't really that well known either. In fact, I think, and he also had trouble fundraising. So Mark Kelly is currently out fundraising Masters by like a lot. I'm too lazy to look at the actual numbers, but yeah, Blake Masters actually tried to fundraise by selling NFTs, and that's actually a true story. So yeah, it's pretty clear why this race would go to the Democrats. Not by a huge margin, but it's definitely going towards the Democrats, and you can see 538 definitely agrees if you look at the Senate predictions right now. And see, yeah, 538, the 538 predictions definitely also show Mark Kelly uh, winning this. Now let's move on to Wisconsin right here. There aren't really that many competitive races in the middle of the country because it's just all Republican. So yeah, Wisconsin. So Wisconsin's a swing state. Biden won there by a bit less than a point. Ron Johnson is the incumbent, and uh, the Democrat nominee, Mandela Barnes, he is the current lieutenant governor, so it isn't too bad of a choice either. Ron Johnson is by no means popular. In fact, he lied about like how the FBI planted some stuff or whatever, and he got booed at by the audience during the debate. So not very popular, but however, there's still definitely this dissatisfaction with the National Democrats, the inflation, the uh, rise of cost of living, the gas prices, and even though he's a lieutenant governor, the lieutenant governor of a state isn't really that well known. Like I have no idea who the lieutenant governor of California is. And Ron Johnson was elected twice by lean margins, so 1 to 5%. He was elected in 2010 and re-elected in 2016. So, and if you look at the polls right now, I cannot spell. Sorry, this is going to be a pretty long video. You can see Ron Johnson's leading, although not by that big of a margin, like 2 points, 3 points. So Johnson's leading, not by a huge margin though. So that's why lean are. Now, you can see we can move on to Ohio right here. And I gave it a likely R characterization, so neither of these are the incumbent. The incumbent, I think, he is Rob Portman. He is retiring this year, so it's J.D. Vance versus Tim Ryan. You can see Ohio used to be a swing state, but starting from 2016, it has clearly favored the Republicans. Trump won there by more than 8 points in both 2016 and 2020. And the polls heavily favor J.D. Vance. You can see, yeah, he's leading by a lot. You can see it was pretty close, but then uh, the gaps are widening again. So, and again, dissatisfaction with the National Democrats. There's a good Democrat nominee. I mean, he's a representative in like a swing district, and he knows how to win competitive elections. But this is just a bad year for the Democrats. And but the reason why it's not safe Republicans, not safe R, is because the GOP nominee is also pretty bad with zero political experience. He did fairly bad in the debate against Tim Ryan, and he also said about how he doesn't care about Ukraine or whatever. So yeah, that's what's dragging it down from a safe Republican, safe R, to a likely R, but J.D. Vance still gonna win. Now, New Hampshire. Easily the most conservative state in New England. We have incumbent Senator Maggie Hazen versus Don Bulldog. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's a lean Democrat, lean D. Why? Because even though New Hampshire is the most conservative state in New England, it still leans Democrat. I mean, Biden won there by around 7 points. And the polls definitely does favor Maggie Hazen. So you can see she's leading. There are some polls that show like Bulldog leading slightly, but overall Hazen's still leading the aggregate poll. And you can see the race has definitely became a lot more close as we approach the final stretch of the election. And she's a fairly popular incumbent, and there's a bad Republican nominee. He had zero political experience. He worked in the military, but not anything like political or like publicly elected office. But the thing is, Maggie Hazen barely won her first election in 2016. She won by like 1,000 votes, and by like less than 1/10 of a percent. So she definitely was not like there definitely wasn't like this overwhelming support for her in 2016, and there's also this dissatisfaction with National Democrats. But despite that, New Hampshire is still a Democrat leaning state in its roots, and so it's definitely gonna go to Hazen by a lean Democrat margin. Now, this is probably the most widely publicized race in the entire nation, Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, we have Dr. Oz versus John Fetterman. John Fetterman being the lieutenant governor, and I think we all know who Dr. Oz is. So Pennsylvania is a swing state. Joe Biden won there by around 1%, and the polls show them being essentially tied. So you can see some polls show Fetterman leading by a fairly significant margin. Some of them show Dr. Oz barely leading. So you can see the race has become a lot closer from a like a 9-point lead by Fetterman to now essentially tied with each other. Oz right now is leading by 0.1%. So the polls are essentially tied. But so when the polls are tied, we can already assume that's going to Republicans because. So my strategy for predicting these is that to always underestimate Republicans because that's what the polls tend to do. And also it's because of the dissatisfaction with the National Democrats, and there's a good okay Dem nominee, but a bad year for the Democrats. So, but what's stopping this from being like a likely R is because there is a really bad GOP nominee with zero political experience. He's well known, but he had zero political experience. He doesn't even live in Pennsylvania. And John Fetterman has probably ratioed him several times on Twitter already. But Fetterman would have a better shot at this if he hadn't had his stroke, which led to him performing poorly at the debate. So yeah, so there are both like pluses and minuses for both sides, and they kind of even out to a tilt R, which means the race could essentially go both ways. I wouldn't be surprised if Fetterman wins, but it's just that I don't want to leave any like states as like undecided, so I gave it to Dr. Oz because it's just a bad year for the Democrats in general. Now, North Carolina, Bud versus Beasley. It's a likely Republican race because North Carolina is a swing state. Trump won there by a singular point, but the polls does pretty significantly favor Ted Budd. And see, Ted Budd's leading by around 5 points. There's also this dissatisfaction with the National Democrats. There's a good Democrat nominee. She was served on the Supreme Court, but it's just a bad year for Democrats. And unlike some of the other questionable choices, the GOP nominee is actually pretty good with political experience. He is a representative for North Carolina's 13th congressional district currently. So yeah, it's definitely going to the Republicans by a likely margin. Now, Georgia, which is another pretty heavily publicized race between incumbent senator and the reverend at the Church of Martin Luther King Jr., Raphael Warnock. He was elected in 2020, and he contributed to Democrats gaining control of the Senate right now. And it's definitely a swing state. Joe Biden won there by 0.2 points. In fact, it was the narrowest state in the entire 2020 election cycle. The polls only slightly favor Walker. You can see Herschel Walker is leading by 0.4%, which means they're essentially tied, but he has like a very slightly advantage in the polls. And I think a lot of us already know who Herschel Walker is. He's a former NFL player. I'm not interested in football, so I had no idea how good of a football player he actually was. But Yeah. So again, there's this dissatisfaction with the National Democrats. There's definitely a good Democrat incumbent, but it's just a bad year for the Democrats. But what's stopping this from being like a likely R or a safe R is that Herschel Walker is simply a horrendous nominee. He had zero political experience, and he had numerous scandals and mental problems too. So, if you knew about like him paying for his girlfriend's abortion and him having sexual intercourse with a lot of women and like having I don't even know how many kids he have, and his son Christian Walker, which is actually a conservative, recently actually spoke out against him about how bad of a father he is, like about him like not really caring about his family at all and just like banging a bunch of women basically. Also a lot of mental problems, threatening to shoot his wife and kill her. Just yeah, he has some problems. However, I don't think it's not enough to offset the state's GOP lean, so it's definitely still going to him by a tilt margin. But I absolutely wouldn't be surprised if Herschel Walker if Raphael Warnock wins re-election again. Tilt is like a very very slight advantage, like less than 1%, and it could easily go both ways. I just don't want to leave any race undecided, so I have to give to a side, and it's Herschel Walker because even though he's a horrendous nominee with numerous scandals, still a bad year for the Democrats and in a GOP leaning state. Now, finally, there isn't really a lot to talk about in Florida. Marco Rubio is going to win. Marco Rubio is going to win his re-election. It's a swing state. Trump won there by around 3 points. However, the polls heavily favor Marco Rubio, and he is a fairly popular incumbent. And see, Rubio leads by around 6 to 11 points. Average is around 7. So yeah, the Democrat nominee is pretty good. She is a representative in the House, but it's just a bad year for the Dems. And he is a popular incumbent and has been serving since 2011. Though there are numerous sexual assault allegations against him, he is still nevertheless a fairly popular and long-serving incumbent, and he'll definitely win re-election. Not not by like over 10 points though, but like he will win his re-election. So yeah, this is the final Senate map after the 2022 midterm elections. Democrats will have 48 seats, Republicans will have 52, which leads to Republicans controlling the Senate. Again, after the actual election is over, I will actually make a follow-up and compare my predictions to the actual results and to some of the major pundits like 538 and Sabato's crystal ball and other election predictors. Now the Senate is probably the most interesting part. I also made this website uh, with all my predictions if you want to see that. Now for the House, right now Democrats barely have a majority. I think they're right now the Democrats have 220 seats in the House. You need 218 for a majority. So the majority is definitely very, very, very narrow. And again, this is a bad year for the Democrats. And House races are generally more localized because people vote for representatives not by a statewide level in most states, but by congressional districts. So there's definitely local matters involved too, but yeah, overall, bad year for the Democrats, and Democrats barely have a majority right now. So I don't think Democrats it'll be like this devastating loss like back in 2010 where Democrats lost like 60 something seats. I don't think it'll be that devastating. But overall, Democrats will still lose some seats, which leads to Republicans gaining control of the chamber. So there are too many competitive House races. I'm not going to cover them all. I'm just going to talk about some significant ones. So this is the one right here. the one my cursor's at right now, is New York's 19th district. And they just had a special election, and the Democrat unexpectedly won. So I think he'll go to the Democrats again, but not by that big of a margin. Now, in Nevada, I think that's the second district. It has a voting index, Cook political voting index of Republican +1, and this is a bad year for the Democrats. So the Democrat incumbent will definitely be unseated, and it'll become a Republican district. Now, Central California has 2 swing districts, so I'll go to the Republicans probably again because this year is a bad year for the Democrats with inflation and gas prices and rising cost of living, and the U.S.'s foreign policy in Ukraine too. Now, also, there's this really interesting House race in Alaska. So Mary Peltola, the Democrat, unexpectedly won the House seat in Alaska back in September, and she actually, I think she'll win re-election. She'll win re-election this November, because there's just a 3-month gap, and the voters' minds are probably not going to change that much. And she is a fairly important. She's a fairly popular incumbent that tries to appeal to both sides of the aisle, and she even has the backing of Lisa Murkowski, the current Republican senator from Alaska. So these even Republican endorsements, and also like how unpopular Sarah Palin is, and how she tries to be bipartisan, definitely contributes to Alaska going blue again. But despite that, the Democrats will still lose their majority in the House. Which will lead to a fully Republican Congress, which will have a lot of impacts for President Biden's agenda. Now, for the governor races, nothing really interesting to see here. You can see Nevada is going to the Republicans since, again, unpopular year for the Democrats. And if we look at the polls, we can see that the Republican nominee Lombardo is leading the current Democrat office holder Steve Sisolak. So, yeah, Nevada, if the Senate race in Nevada is going to the Democrat, it's going to the Republicans, then the governor's race will probably go to Republicans too. In Arizona, there's Kari Lake versus Katie Hobbs. The polls say that Kari Lake is leading by pretty significantly, so Kari Lake is probably winning. Now, Wisconsin is pretty weird. So Tony Evers, who is the incumbent, is fairly popular, but the polls does say that the Republican is ever so slightly leading. If we go right here, you can see Tim Michaels, the Republican, is leading ever so slightly. You can see the race is definitely getting closer and closer. You can see the Democrats is leading the Democrat is losing their lead. So yeah, it could go either way because the poll lead isn't that significant. But if I don't want to leave any races blank, so I'm just putting it as a tilt Republican. But I wouldn't be surprised if Tony Evers wins re-election. Pennsylvania, even though the Senate race is really close, the Republican nominee is just a far-right nutcase. So the Democrat is winning there. And also, what I find pretty interesting is Oklahoma. So you know how when you think of Oklahoma, you think of this really Republican and conservative state. They passed their absolute total abortion ban. But the very interesting thing is the governor's races are also take account into local issues, and it's not that surprising if like they elect a person from the opposite party. And if you look at the polls, you can see Emerson College is a Republican-leaning pollster, so they are definitely gonna maybe overestimate the Republican a little bit. But you can see in some of the polls, you can see the Democrat is actually leading. And in the polls that the current Governor Kevin Stitt is leading, he isn't leading by that much. So I do think, like, in Oklahoma, the Republican governor will still win re-election, but it's just really interesting, and he probably won't win it by a lot. I have no idea what's going down in Oklahoma right now, but there's definitely something going on there that makes the Democrat fairly popular. So yeah, these are my predictions. Let's see, 204 to 231 House with the Republicans in control, 48 to 52 Senate with the Republicans in control, and governorship. It's just that for the governorship, surprisingly, the Democrats and Republicans, neither of them will be gaining any governor spots, which is really interesting. Oh wait, another race I forgot to cover is Oregon. So Oregon is this really blue state in this Pacific Northwest, but they might actually elect a Republican governor. Why? Because right now, the Katie Brown, the current governor of Oregon, is very, very unpopular. The most unpopular governor in this nation. And the fact that there's actually an independent candidate running right now might split the vote away from the Democrats, which is not good news for the Democrats. And you can see that Drazen is actually leading over Tina Kotek in most of these polls, although not by a lot, because the independent candidate Johnson is getting significant amounts of support. However, this new poll from Emerson does show a significant drop off of support for the independent candidate, and which gives the Democrat nominee a lead again. So I think the Democrats will still hold on to Oregon, but like by a very narrow margin. So yeah, these are my election predictions. We'll take a look at this again in a week or so when all of the results are finalized and see how well I did, especially against the famous and notable election pundits. This is quite a bit of an unusual, long, and possibly very boring and run-on video, but I don't really care about this channel. I just want to express my political predictions here. So, second channel, don't really care. Bye.